The cold November wind sliced through Willow Embers' shawl as she stood before the dimly lit inn, her knuckles white from clutching her single carpet bag, the words of the innkeeper still ringing in her ears. "We don't take credit, and we don't take charity cases, especially not widows with no prospects." Montana Territory, 1876. A year since influenza had taken her husband, 6 months since the bank had taken their small Kansas farm, 3 days since the stagecoach had dropped her in this mining town where a distant cousin had once mentioned opportunity waited. But her cousin was gone, the mining boom had faded, and now, as darkness fell and the first snowflakes began to drift down from the gunmetal sky, Willow had nowhere to go. She turned away from the inn, tears freezing on her cheeks, and stumbled down the muddy main street. The buildings grew more sparse at the edge of town, most dark except for one small cabin where golden lamplight spilled from the windows. Without thinking, driven by desperation and the plummeting temperature, Willow found herself on the rough-hewn porch, raising her hand to knock. The door swung open before her knuckles could make contact. A tall man stood silhouetted against the warm light, his broad shoulders nearly filling the doorframe. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, her with snowflakes melting in her auburn hair, him with surprise evident in his weather-tanned face. "I'm sorry to disturb you," Willow began, her voice catching. "The inn turned you away," he finished, his deep voice surprisingly gentle. His eyes, the color of summer grass, took in her thin coat, her trembling hands, and the single bag that held everything she owned in the world. Without another word, he stepped back and opened the door wider, leaning close as she passed by him. "Stay here with me," he whispered, the words both an offer and a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. That was how Willow Embers, 26 and widowed, met Xavier Yates, 32 and alone, on the coldest night of the year. The cabin was small but tidy, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall where flames danced cheerfully. A worn but clean rug covered most of the plank floor, and a table with 2 chairs sat near a small kitchen area. Through an open door, Willow glimpsed a bedroom with a neatly made bed. "I'll sleep out here," Xavier said, following her gaze. "You take the bedroom." "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," he interrupted, but there was no harshness in his tone. "Been meaning to clear that second room anyway." He nodded toward another door. "Full of supplies and whatnot now, but it'll make a proper bedroom someday." Willow stood awkwardly, unsure what to do with herself or her bag. Her upbringing told her she shouldn't be alone with a strange man, let alone spending the night in his home. But the howling wind outside and the memory of the innkeeper's sneering face made the decision for her. "Thank you, Mr. Yates, Xavier Yates." He took her bag gently from her hand. "But everyone just calls me X, Willow Embers," she offered in return, unwinding her shawl from her shoulders. Xavier nodded, setting her bag inside the bedroom door. "Mrs. Embers, just Willow, please," she swallowed hard. "My husband died last year." Something flashed in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or shared pain. "I'm sorry to hear that." He turned abruptly toward the kitchen. "You must be hungry." "I was just about to have supper. Nothing fancy, just beans and bacon, but there's plenty." Willow hadn't eaten since morning, when she'd carefully rationed the last of her bread and cheese. "That sounds wonderful. Please let me help." While Xavier added more beans to the pot already simmering on the stove, Willow set the table with the mismatched plates and utensils he pointed out. The domesticity of the scene struck her with unexpected force. How long had it been since she'd shared a meal with anyone? How long since simple human companionship over supper? Xavier asked no prying questions. He told her only that he worked for the Silver Creek Mining Company, not as a miner but handling their horses and wagons. The cabin had come with the job. He'd been there 3 years, and before that. Willow asked, curious about this quiet man who had opened his door to a stranger. Xavier looked down at his plate. Rode with a cattle outfit in Texas, before that the Army. His tone suggested there was more to the story, but he didn't elaborate. When they finished eating, Willow insisted on washing the dishes. Xavier didn't argue, just dried each one as she handed it to him, their fingers occasionally brushing in the exchange. "What brings you to Silver Creek?" he finally asked as they worked. Willow told him about her cousin, the promised job as a schoolteacher that had evaporated when she arrived to find the school closed due to lack of funds. "I have some savings," she admitted, "but not enough for a ticket back east, and there's nothing to go back to anyway." She scrubbed a stubborn spot on a plate with unnecessary vigor. "I thought I might find work at the hotel or perhaps doing laundry." Xavier's expression darkened. "Old man Reeves at the inn is known for turning away folks he doesn't think fit his establishment. The whole town isn't like that." "I hope not," Willow said softly, "because I need to find work quickly." "The general store might be hiring," Xavier offered. "Mrs. Patterson runs it since her husband passed. She's a fair woman." Willow nodded, grateful for the suggestion. "I'll inquire tomorrow." That night, despite her exhaustion, Willow lay awake in Xavier's bed, surrounded by the unfamiliar scent of him, leather and pine, and something indefinably masculine. She thought about her husband, Thomas, and the life they'd planned together. She thought about the baby they'd lost before it was born, and how that grief had hollowed them both out in different ways. And she thought about the stranger sleeping on a bedroll before the fire, and why a man with such kindness in his eyes lived alone at the edge of town. In the morning, Willow woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Xavier moving quietly about the cabin. When she emerged, dressed in her second-best dress, the best one carefully packed away to preserve it, he was frying salt pork and potatoes. "There's coffee," he said, nodding toward the pot. "Strong enough to stand a spoon in." Willow smiled, her first genuine smile in days. "Perfect." After breakfast, Xavier offered to walk her into town. "Need to pick up some supplies anyway," he explained, though Willow suspected it was more to ensure she wouldn't face rejection alone again. The town looked different in daylight, smaller, shabbier, but also more alive. The general store sat in the middle of the main street, its windows displaying everything from tools to fabric to canned goods. A bell jingled as they entered, and a plump woman with steel-gray hair looked up from behind the counter. "Xavier Yates twice in 1 week. Must be a special occasion," she said with a warm smile that faded slightly when she noticed Willow. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Mrs. Embers," Xavier said. "She's new in town, looking for work." Understanding dawned in the older woman's eyes. "Ah, you must be the one Reeves turned away last night. Word travels fast in Silver Creek." She extended her hand to Willow. "Grace Patterson, pleased to meet you properly." Willow shook her hand, grateful for the welcome. "I was wondering if you might know of any employment opportunities in town." Mrs. Patterson studied her thoughtfully. "Can you read and write well?" "Yes, madam. I was to be the schoolteacher before I learned the position had been eliminated." "That's a shame. We need a proper school." Mrs. Patterson tapped her fingers on the counter. "I don't need help in the store, but Doc Wilson mentioned needing someone to keep his books and maybe help with patients. He's getting on in years." Hope fluttered in Willow's chest. "I have some experience with nursing. My mother taught me. His office is just down the street. Can't miss it as a sign with a mortar and pestle." Mrs. Patterson turned to Xavier. "You need anything today, X?" While Xavier collected coffee, flour, and ammunition, Willow thanked Mrs. Patterson for her help. "Where are you staying?" the older woman asked quietly. Willow hesitated. "Mr. Yates was kind enough to offer shelter last night." Something knowing flickered in Mrs. Patterson's eyes, but she merely nodded. "He's a good man, X is. Keeps to himself mostly, but there's not a more decent soul in these parts." Outside, Xavier walked with Willow to the doctor's office, waiting on the street while she went inside. "Doctor." Wilson was indeed elderly, with gnarled hands and rheumy eyes, but his mind was sharp. He asked Willow about her education, her experience, and her circumstances. "I don't need much help with the patients," he admitted. "Town's too small for that. But my ledgers are a mess, and I can't see well enough to read or write letters anymore." He named a modest salary. "Includes a room in the back if you want it." Willow thought of Xavier's cabin, of his kindness, of the way he'd whispered, "Stay here with me," like he meant it for more than just one night. But she couldn't impose indefinitely, and she needed her independence. "I accept," she said. "When shall I start?" "Tomorrow morning," Dr. Wilson said. "Give you time to settle in. Room's dusty, but it's yours to clean as you like." When Willow emerged from the doctor's office, Xavier was leaning against a hitching post, his hat pulled low over his eyes. She couldn't read his expression as she told him about the job and the room. "That's good," he said finally. "Wilson's a decent sort." They walked back to the cabin in silence, the air between them suddenly awkward where before it had been comfortable. Willow wondered if Xavier was relieved to be rid of her so quickly, or if, like her, he felt a strange reluctance to end whatever had begun the night before. At the cabin, Willow gathered her few belongings. "I don't know how to thank you," she said as she fastened her carpet bag. Xavier stood by the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel. "No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Willow said softly. "They wouldn't have." She thought of the innkeeper, of the closed doors and turned backs she'd faced since Thomas died. What you did, it meant everything. Xavier looked away, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "I'll walk you back to town." "There's no need, I'll walk you," he repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. The walk back to town seemed shorter this time. At the doctor's office, Xavier helped her carry her bag inside and waited while Dr. Wilson showed her to the small room behind his examining room. It was indeed dusty, with just a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small chest of drawers, but to Willow, it represented safety and a new beginning. When it was time for Xavier to leave, Willow walked him to the door. "Thank you again," she said, holding out her hand. Xavier took it, his large hand engulfing hers. "If you need anything, I'll know where to find you," she finished for him. He nodded, then hesitated as if wanting to say more. Instead, he simply squeezed her hand and left, his broad shoulders disappearing down the street. Willow watched until he was out of sight, then turned back to her new home, a strange mixture of hope and loss swirling in her heart. The next few weeks passed in a blur of new routines. Willow proved adept at organizing Dr. Wilson's chaotic records, and her neat handwriting made his correspondence legible for the first time in years. She learned the names and ailments of his regular patients, mostly old miners with lung problems and working men with injuries. She cleaned and aired out her little room until it was cozy, if sparse. She saw Xavier occasionally in town at the general store or passing on the street. Each time he tipped his hat politely, sometimes stopping for a brief conversation that always felt too short. Once he brought a bundle of herbs he'd collected in the hills. "Thought the doc might use these," he said, handing them to Willow. "My mother used to make a tea from them for coughs." Dr. Wilson confirmed they were indeed medicinal and seemed impressed that Xavier knew their properties. "That man knows more than he lets on," the doctor commented after Xavier had left. Willow learned more about Xavier from others in town. From Mrs. Patterson, she heard he'd come to Silver Creek after some trouble in Texas. "Nothing bad," the storekeeper hastened to add. "Just a falling out with his employer." From Dr. Wilson, she learned Xavier had served as a cavalry scout during the war, though he never spoke of it. And from the blacksmith, she heard Xavier had a way with even the most difficult horses, a gift that made him invaluable to the mining company. No one mentioned family or sweethearts, past or present. Xavier Yates seemed to have arrived in Silver Creek alone and remained that way by choice. December arrived with bitter cold and frequent snowstorms. The doctor's practice slowed as people stayed home when possible, though there were still broken bones from falls on ice and respiratory ailments to treat. Willow found herself with more time to think about her past, her future, and increasingly about Xavier. She told herself it was foolish. She barely knew the man. She was still mourning Thomas in many ways. And yet she couldn't deny the way her heart quickened when the bell above the door rang and Xavier walked in, snowflakes melting on his coat and his cheeks ruddy from the cold. "Doc around?" He asked one such afternoon in mid-December. Making a house call at the Johnsons, Willow replied. Their youngest has a fever. Can I help you with something? Xavier shook his head. Just needed to pick up a powder for headaches. It can wait. He turned to leave, but Willow called him back. I know where he keeps them. I can get you some. While she measured the powder into paper twists, Xavier stood awkwardly in the middle of the office. How are you settling in? He finally asked. Well enough, Willow said. Dr. Wilson is kind and the work is interesting. And the town. Better than your first impression, I hope, Willow smiled, handing him the headache powders. Much better, thanks to you. Xavier looked away, embarrassed. Haven't done anything. You gave me shelter when I needed it most, Willow said quietly. You didn't have to do that. Xavier was silent for a long moment. Been on the receiving end of closed doors myself, he finally said. Wouldn't wish that on anyone, especially not with snow coming on. He took the powders, their fingers brushing. What about Christmas? You have plans? The question caught Willow off guard. She hadn't thought about Christmas, had been deliberately avoiding thinking about the holiday that had always been special to her and Thomas. No plans, she admitted. Dr. Wilson will be with his daughter's family in Helena. Xavier nodded, seeming to come to a decision. Mining company gives us Christmas Day off. Thought I might cook a proper dinner. He cleared his throat. You'd be welcome to join me if you wanted. Warmth spread through Willow's chest. I'd like that very much. Xavier's smile transformed his face, making him look younger, less careworn. Good, that's good. After he left, Willow found herself humming as she worked, the prospect of Christmas suddenly brighter than it had been in a long time. The week before Christmas, a terrible blizzard swept through the valley. Dr. Wilson left for Helena just ahead of the storm, leaving Willow to mind the office, though he didn't expect many patients in such weather. She spent the first day organizing supplies and reading one of the doctor's medical texts. By the second day, cabin fever had set in, and she was restlessly pacing the small office when the door burst open, bringing a swirl of snow and Xavier. Thank goodness you're all right, he said, stamping snow from his boots. Wasn't sure if you'd have enough firewood or supplies. Willow was touched by his concern. I'm fine. Dr. Wilson made sure I had everything I needed before he left. She looked at Xavier's frost-covered coat and hat. But you're freezing. Come warm yourself by the stove. Xavier hesitated only briefly before unwrapping his scarf and removing his coat. Underneath, he wore a wool shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. He held his hands out to the stove, flexing fingers red with cold. You shouldn't have risked coming out in this, Willow chided gently, pouring him a cup of coffee from the pot she kept on the back of the stove. Needed to check on a few folks, Xavier said, accepting the coffee gratefully. Old Widow Jenkins, the Larson kids whose pa's laid up with a broken leg. You, me. Willow couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Xavier looked up from his coffee, his green eyes intense. You're alone here. Had to make sure you were safe. The simple declaration warmed Willow more than the stove ever could. Thank you for thinking of me. They talked while Xavier thawed out, more easily than they had before. Xavier told her about his job, about the team of draft horses he managed, and the supply routes to the mines in the surrounding hills. Willow shared stories from her childhood in Ohio, her voice only faltering slightly when she mentioned Thomas. How long were you married? Xavier asked quietly. 5 years, Willow replied. We met when I was 18, married at 20. He was a good man, kind, hardworking. We had a small farm in Kansas. What happened? Xavier's question was gentle, without the morbid curiosity she'd encountered from others. Influenza, Willow said simply. It swept through our county last winter. Thomas caught it first. By the time he was gone, I was sick too. She swallowed hard. The neighbors were afraid to come near the house. I nearly died alone. Xavier's hand moved as if to reach for hers, then withdrew. I'm sorry, he said, and in his voice, Willow heard genuine understanding. After I recovered, I couldn't keep up with the farm, she continued. The bank foreclosed in the spring. I taught at the local school for a while, saved what I could, then heard from my cousin about the teaching position here. She gave a small, rueful laugh. And you know the rest, Xavier was quiet for a moment. Life has a way of taking unexpected turns, he finally said, sometimes for the worse. But sometimes for the better, Willow finished when he trailed off. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who had weathered storms and emerged battered but unbroken. The blizzard raged for 3 days. Xavier visited each day, bringing news from around town and staying longer each time. On the 3rd day, the storm finally began to ease, and Xavier reluctantly prepared to leave. "Christmas is still on," he said at the door. "If you're still interested." "I am," Willow assured him. "Very much so." Xavier nodded, seemingly pleased. "I'll come fetch you. Weather should be clear by then." After he left, Willow stood at the window watching his figure grow smaller as he trudged through the snow. For the first time since Thomas died, she felt a flutter of something that might have been happiness. Christmas morning dawned clear and blindingly bright, the sun reflecting off the pristine snow that blanketed the town. Willow woke early, filled with an excitement she hadn't felt in years. She dressed in her best dress, navy blue wool with small pearl buttons, and arranged her hair more carefully than usual. From her carpet bag, she took out a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string a gift for Xavier that she'd purchased secretly from Mrs. Patterson. Xavier arrived at precisely noon, driving a small sleigh pulled by a sturdy bay horse. He wore a clean black coat over a white shirt, his hair neatly combed, and Willow realized with a start that he was quite handsome when not covered in trail dust or snow. "Merry Christmas," he said, helping her into the sleigh and tucking a fur robe around her legs. "You look nice." Willow felt herself blushing like a schoolgirl. "Thank you. Merry Christmas to you too." The sleigh ride to Xavier's cabin was magical. The landscape glittered like diamonds in the sunlight, and the sleigh bells jingled merrily as they glided over the packed snow. Xavier pointed out landmarks as they passed the entrance to the largest mine, a frozen waterfall, a stand of pines where he'd seen a family of deer that morning. "It's beautiful here," Willow said, breathing in the crisp, clean air. "I was too worried to notice when I first arrived." "It grows on you," Xavier agreed. "Took me a while to appreciate it too." At the cabin, Willow was surprised to see smoke already rising from the chimney. "I asked Mrs. Patterson's boy to come light the fire earlier," Xavier explained as he helped her down from the sleigh. "Wanted it warm for when we arrived." Inside, the cabin was transformed. A small evergreen stood in one corner, decorated with strings of dried berries and a few simple wooden ornaments. The table was set with what appeared to be Xavier's best dishes, mismatched but clean, and a red candle stood in the center. The fire crackled cheerfully in the hearth, and delicious smells wafted from the kitchen area. "Xavier, it's wonderful," Willow breathed, turning in a circle to take it all in. "Haven't celebrated Christmas properly in years," he admitted, taking her coat. "Figured it was time." Dinner was a feast by frontier standards, a roasted chicken, potatoes, carrots, fresh bread that Xavier confessed Mrs. Patterson had baked, and an apple pie for dessert. They ate and talked, the conversation flowing easily now that they were becoming more comfortable with each other. After dinner, they moved to the chairs by the fire. Xavier added more logs, then reached behind the woodbox and produced a small package wrapped in newspaper. "Got you something," he said gruffly, handing it to her. "Nothing fancy." Willow unwrapped it carefully to find a small wooden box with a carved lid. The carving depicted a willow tree, its branches gracefully sweeping down to touch the ground. "Did you make this?" she asked, running her fingers over the detailed work. Xavier nodded, a touch of color appearing on his cheekbones. "Been whittling since I was a boy, thought you might need somewhere to keep small things." "It's beautiful," Willow said sincerely. "I've never received anything so thoughtful." She reached for her own package. "I have something for you too." Xavier opened it with the careful precision of someone unaccustomed to receiving gifts. Inside was a leather-bound journal with blank pages and a good pencil. Mrs. Patterson said you sometimes write things down, observations about plants and animals, Willow explained. I thought you might like a proper place to keep your notes. Xavier looked genuinely touched. Thank you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. This is perfect. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the fire. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and gentle, unlike the raging blizzard of the week before. Would you tell me about your family? Willow asked eventually. I've talked so much about mine, but I know nothing about yours. Xavier was quiet for so long that Willow thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. My father was a farmer in Pennsylvania, had a small apple orchard. My mother died when I was 10, influenza like your Thomas. He paused. Had a younger sister, Eliza. She was my responsibility after mother died. The past tense made Willow's heart ache. What happened to them? Father died just before the war started. I joined up, sent what money I could to Eliza. She was staying with an aunt. Xavier stared into the fire. In '63, while I was fighting in Virginia, raiders burned the town. Eliza and my aunt didn't make it out. Oh, Xavier, Willow whispered, instinctively reaching for his hand. I'm so sorry. He intertwined his fingers with hers, the first time he deliberately touched her beyond brief, necessary contact. After the war, I had nowhere to go, rode west, worked cattle, drifted, ended up here. Alone, Willow said softly. Xavier's eyes met hers. Until now. The simple statement hung in the air between them, filled with possibility. Willow felt a tension in her chest, a mixture of hope and fear. She had not expected to find connection again after Thomas, had not been looking for it, and yet here it was, offered in this quiet cabin on Christmas Day. I should take you back before the snow gets worse, Xavier said, though he made no move to release her hand. Yes, Willow agreed reluctantly. I suppose you should. Neither of them moved. The fire popped and hissed, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the snow continued to fall, wrapping the cabin in a cocoon of white, separating them from the rest of the world. Or you could stay, Xavier said, so quietly Willow almost didn't hear him. There's the bedroom. I'd sleep out here like before. Willow knew she should refuse. It wasn't proper. People would talk. And yet, the thought of returning to her cold, empty room behind the doctor's office on Christmas night was unbearable. I'll stay, she decided, but only if you're sure it's no imposition. Relief and something else, happiness, perhaps flashed across Xavier's face. No imposition at all. That night, lying in Xavier's bed for the second time, Willow felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. She could hear Xavier moving quietly in the main room, banking the fire for the night, and the familiar sounds soothed her. When sleep came, it was deep and dreamless. In the morning, Xavier insisted on making breakfast before taking her back to town. They moved around the small kitchen together, their bodies finding a natural rhythm as if they'd done this dance before. Over hot cakes and coffee, they made tentative plans. Xavier would come to town for dinner the following Sunday, and perhaps they could attend the New Year's dance together if Willow was interested. The ride back to town was quieter than the journey out, but it was a comfortable silence, full of shared understanding and unspoken connection. At the doctor's office, Xavier helped Willow down from the sleigh, his hands lingering at her waist. Thank you for Christmas, Willow said, looking up at him. It was perfect, Xavier smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. Thank you for sharing it with me. He hesitated, then leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek, his lips warm against her cold skin. Sunday, he reminded her before climbing back into the sleigh. Willow stood watching until the sleigh disappeared around a corner, her hand touching the spot where his lips had been, a smile she couldn't suppress spreading across her face. Word traveled fast in Silver Creek. By the time Dr. Wilson returned from Helena 2 days after Christmas, most of the town knew Willow had spent Christmas Day and night at Xavier Yates's cabin. The doctor said nothing directly, but Willow caught him watching her with speculative eyes as she worked. Finally, as they were closing up the office one evening, he cleared his throat. "Known Xavier Yates since he came to town 3 years ago," he said conversationally. "Patched him up a time or two when horses got the better of him. Good man, keeps to himself mostly." Willow continued organizing the medicine bottles, uncertain how to respond. "Lost someone in the war, I gather," Dr. Wilson continued. "Makes a man cautious about connections." He gave Willow a significant look. "But some connections are worth the risk." "I believe they are," Willow said carefully. The doctor nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good, very good." He picked up his hat. "Life's too short to let fear dictate your choices, Mrs. Embers. Lost my Martha 15 years ago, still miss her every day. But I wouldn't trade our time together to avoid the pain of losing her." His words stayed with Willow long after he'd gone. She thought about Thomas, about the good years they'd had together, and the dreams that had died with him. She thought about Xavier, alone for so long with his own ghosts. And she thought about herself, the woman she had been before grief, the woman she was becoming now. By the time Sunday arrived, Willow had come to a decision. Whatever was growing between her and Xavier, she would not let fear hold her back from exploring it. Xavier arrived at precisely 6 o'clock, wearing a clean shirt and carrying a small bunch of winter greenery tied with twine. "From the pines behind my cabin," he explained, handing it to her. "Thought it might brighten up your room." The simple gesture touched Willow deeply. She placed the greenery in a jar of water, the fresh pine scent filling her small quarters. She had prepared a simple meal, beef stew and dumplings, with apple cobbler for dessert, using the small stove in the back room of the doctor's office. They ate at the doctor's desk, cleared of papers and covered with a clean cloth. Xavier complimented her cooking, and Willow found herself blushing with pleasure. They talked easily, sharing stories and observations, discovering common interests and gentle disagreements. Xavier, it turned out, had a dry sense of humor that emerged more as he grew comfortable with her. Willow found herself laughing more than she had in over a year. After dinner, they sat in the doctor's chairs by the office stove, reluctant for the evening to end. Outside, snow fell again, soft and steady. "Will you come to the New Year's dance?" Xavier asked. "If you're not comfortable being seen with me, why wouldn't I be comfortable?" Willow interrupted, genuinely puzzled. Xavier looked away. "People talk. Might not be good for your reputation, being associated with a man like me." "A man like you," Willow repeated. "You mean a kind, honorable man who helps strangers in need and checks on neighbors during blizzards." Xavier's mouth twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. "Not exactly how most folks would describe me. Most would say I'm the standoffish fellow who lives alone at the edge of town and doesn't participate in community affairs." "Then most folks don't know you very well," Willow said firmly. "And yes, I would be honored to attend the dance with you." The New Year's dance was held in the town hall, a large wooden building that served as church, meeting place, and social center for Silver Creek. Colorful bunting decorated the walls, and oil lamps cast a warm glow over the proceedings. A small band, 2 fiddlers, a banjo player, and a man with a harmonica provided lively music. Willow wore her best dress, the dark blue wool with pearl buttons, and had arranged her auburn hair in a more elaborate style than usual. Xavier, in a black suit that looked as though it had been carefully brushed but seldom worn, seemed nervous as he escorted her into the hall. "Everyone's looking," he muttered as they entered. "Let them look," Willow replied, taking his arm with more confidence than she felt. The truth was, she was nervous too. This was her first public appearance with Xavier, a declaration of sorts to the town that they were. What exactly, courting? The word seemed both old-fashioned and premature, yet it sent a pleasant shiver down her spine. Mrs. Patterson immediately bustled over to greet them, her approval evident in her wide smile. "Don't you two look handsome?" she exclaimed. "Xavier Yates at a social function I never thought I'd see the day." Other townspeople were more reserved, some offering polite greetings while others whispered behind their hands. The innkeeper who had turned Willow away that first night gave them a cold stare from across the room. Willow lifted her chin and deliberately looked away. "Would you like to dance?" Xavier asked as the band struck up a waltz. "I would," Willow said, though she hadn't danced since before Thomas fell ill, "though I'm terribly out of practice." "Makes two of us," Xavier said with a self-deprecating smile. "Last time I danced was at my cousin's wedding before the war." Despite their warnings, they moved well together. Xavier was surprisingly graceful for such a large man, and his hand at Willow's waist was steady and sure. As they circled the floor, Willow felt the stares of the other dancers but found she didn't care. There was something right about being in Xavier's arms, something that felt like coming home after a long journey. As midnight approached, the band played slower tunes. During one such dance, Xavier held Willow closer than before, close enough that she could feel the solid warmth of his chest against hers. "I never expected this," he said quietly, his breath stirring the hair near her ear. "What?" Willow asked, looking up at him. "You," Xavier said simply. "After Eliza died after the war, I never thought I'd want to let anyone close again." Willow's heart quickened. And now, Xavier's green eyes were serious, searching her face. "Now I can't imagine going back to the way things were before you knocked on my door that night." The band struck the first notes of Auld Lang Syne, and around them, people began counting down to midnight. Willow and Xavier remained still in the middle of the dance floor, locked in their private moment. 10, 9, 8, the crowd chanted. "I lost someone too," Willow said. "I thought that part of my life was over." 7, 6, 5. "And now," Xavier echoed her earlier question. 4, 3, 2, "Now I'm ready to begin again," Willow whispered. "With you if you want that too." 1, "Happy New Year." As cheers erupted around them, Xavier lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost hesitant, but when Willow responded, sliding her hands up to his shoulders, the kiss deepened. In that moment, surrounded by the celebrations of their neighbors yet completely alone in their private world, Willow felt the final pieces of her broken heart begin to mend. When they finally broke apart, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I want that more than anything," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "To begin again. With you." The weeks following the New Year's dance were the happiest Willow had known since before Thomas fell ill. She and Xavier settled into a rhythm. He would come to town several evenings a week for dinner, and on Sundays after church, which Xavier had begun attending, much to the surprise of the congregation. They would spend the day together, sometimes at his cabin, sometimes taking drives in his sleigh to explore the surrounding countryside. In public, they were discreet but not secretive. Xavier would offer Willow his arm as they walked down the street, and occasionally, when he thought no one was looking, he would brush a kiss against her temple or the back of her hand. In private, their affection grew more demonstrative, longer kisses, embraces that left Willow breathless, conversations that lasted late into the night. They learned each other's stories, filling in the gaps of their lives before Silver Creek. Xavier told Willow about his time in the cavalry, scouting for the Union Army, and the nightmares that still sometimes woke him. Willow shared her dreams of having children, dreams that had been deferred first by the miscarriage and then by Thomas's death. "I never thought I'd want a family again," Xavier admitted one Sunday afternoon as they sat by the fire in his cabin. "After losing Eliza, it seemed safer to stay alone. And now," Willow asked, her heart beating faster. Xavier took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Now I think about it all the time, a home that's more than just shelter, children, a wife." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "You," the raw honesty in his voice moved Willow deeply. "I think about that too," she confessed. "A new beginning, a family." February brought Valentine's Day, and with it, Xavier's first formal declaration of love. He presented Willow with a carved wooden heart, small enough to fit in her palm, with their initials intertwined on one side. "I love you, Willow Embers," he said simply. "Have since that first night, I think, though I was too stubborn to admit it even to myself. Willow, tears in her eyes, gave him the scarf she had knitted in secret during the long evenings alone. "And I love you, Xavier Yates, more than I thought possible." As winter began to loosen its grip on the valley, and the first signs of spring appeared, longer days, patches of bare ground where the snow had melted, the return of birdsong, their conversations turned increasingly to the future. Dr. Wilson, observing their growing closeness, began dropping hints about selling his practice and retiring to Helena to be near his daughter. "Need a younger doctor here anyway," he remarked to Willow one day. "And that little room's no place for a married woman to live." Willow blushed furiously at the implication, but couldn't deny that she and Xavier had been discussing marriage, though no formal proposal had been made. The idea of becoming Mrs. Yates, of making a home with Xavier in his small cabin, which he'd begun improving, adding shelves and a second proper bedroom, filled her with a joy she had not expected to feel again. In late March, almost exactly 4 months after Willow had first knocked on Xavier's door, he asked her to marry him. It happened not in a grand, orchestrated moment, but in a quiet, ordinary one. They were walking along Silver Creek, now free of ice, watching the water tumble over rocks on its journey down the mountain. "I want to build a proper house," Xavier said suddenly. "Up on that rise above the cabin where you can see the valley and the mountains. 2 stories with a wide porch and big windows to let in the light." Willow looked at him, surprised by the specificity of the vision. "That sounds wonderful." "It would have a proper kitchen," Xavier continued, "and a study for your books, 4 bedrooms upstairs." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "One for us and the others for children, if you wanted that." Willow's breath caught. "I would want that very much." Xavier took both her hands in his. "I'm not good with fancy words, Willow, but I love you more than I thought possible. You brought light back into my life when I'd resigned myself to the dark." He squeezed her hands gently. "Will you marry me, be my wife, have a family with me, grow old with me?" Tears of happiness welled in Willow's eyes. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." Xavier's smile was radiant as he pulled her into his arms and kissed her. There, beside the rushing creek with the mountains as their witness. They were married on the 1st day of May, 1877, in the small church in Silver Creek. Mrs. Patterson had insisted on organizing everything, declaring that Willow deserved a proper wedding, not just a quick ceremony at the Justice of the Peace, as Xavier had initially suggested. "Never seen a man so nervous, Doctor." Wilson chuckled as he prepared to walk Willow down the aisle, having offered to stand in for her father. Checked his pocket for the ring at least 20 times. Willow, in a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Patterson and several other ladies from town had helped her make, felt a flutter of nerves herself as the small church organ began to play. But when she saw Xavier waiting for her at the altar, tall and handsome in a new black suit, all nervousness vanished, replaced by absolute certainty. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They exchanged simple vows and rings gold bands that Xavier had ordered from Helena. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier's kiss was tender and reverent, mindful of their audience but still conveying the depth of his feelings. The entire town turned out for the celebration afterward, held in the town hall. There was dancing and food, laughter, and a few tears. Even the innkeeper who had turned Willow away that first night came to offer stilted congratulations, which Willow accepted graciously, her happiness too complete to hold grudges. As the celebration wound down, Xavier led Willow outside into the soft May evening. Stars were just beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and the air was fragrant with spring blossoms. "Mrs. Yates," he said, his voice filled with wonder, "never thought I'd say those words to anyone." "Mr. Yates," Willow replied, leaning into his embrace, "I'm very glad you did." They spent their wedding night in Xavier's cabin, their cabin now, which had been transformed in preparation for Willow's arrival. New curtains hung at the windows, a colorful quilt covered the bed, and wildflowers filled vases on every surface. gifts from well-wishers in town. In the privacy of their home, their love found its full expression. Xavier was gentle and passionate, Willow eager and loving, and together they discovered the profound intimacy that they had both been missing for so long. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, Xavier traced lazy patterns on Willow's bare shoulder. "Happy?" he asked softly. "Completely," Willow assured him, her head resting on his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "And you?" "More than I ever thought possible," Xavier said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Thank you for knocking on my door that night." "Thank you for opening it," Willow replied, "for whispering 'stay here with me.'" They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, the past with its sorrows not forgotten but no longer defining their futures, which stretched before them full of promise and hope. True to his word, Xavier began building their new house that summer, with help from friends in town. By the time snow fell again in November, exactly 1 year after Willow had arrived in Silver Creek, the house was finished enough for them to move in, though Xavier continued to work on details throughout the winter. It was everything he had promised: 2 stories with a wide porch, large windows that filled the rooms with light, a proper kitchen where Willow could bake the bread and pies that Xavier loved, and a small study lined with bookshelves that Xavier had built by hand. And upstairs, 4 bedrooms, 1 for them, and 3 waiting for the children they hoped would come. They didn't have to wait long. In the spring of 1878, Willow discovered she was expecting their first child. Xavier's response was a mixture of joy and terror that made Willow laugh and cry at the same time. "What if I'm no good at being a father?" he worried, pacing their bedroom. "You'll be wonderful," Willow assured him. "You're already wonderful at being a husband." Their daughter, Elizabeth Grace Yates, named for Xavier's sister and Mrs. Patterson, who had become like a mother to Willow, was born on a snowy December night in 1878. Dr. Wilson, though officially retired, came through the blizzard to attend the birth, bringing with him a young doctor who had purchased his practice. Xavier held his daughter with trembling hands, looking down at her tiny face with an expression of awe. "She's perfect," he whispered, tears in his eyes. Like her mother, watching her husband with their child, Willow felt her heart might burst with happiness. The journey that had brought her to Silver Creek had been marked by loss and grief, but it had led her to this moment, this family, this love. 2 years later, their son Thomas Xavier was born, followed by another daughter, Rebecca, in 1882. Their house on the hill filled with laughter, toys, books, and all the beautiful chaos of family life. Xavier continued working for the mining company, eventually becoming the transportation manager for all their operations in the territory. Willow, when the children were old enough, began teaching part-time at the school that the town had finally established. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep, Xavier and Willow would often sit on their porch, watching the lights of Silver Creek below and the stars above. Sometimes they spoke of the past of Thomas and Eliza, of the losses that had shaped them. More often, they talked of the present and the future of their children's latest achievements, of their hopes and dreams. "You ever think about that night?" Xavier asked once, his arm around Willow as they watched a meteor shower streak across the summer sky. "When you knocked on my door?" "Often," Willow admitted. "I was so desperate, so alone, and then there you were, offering shelter when no one else would." Xavier squeezed her gently. "Best decision I ever made, asking you to stay." Willow rested her head on his shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined possible when she stood shivering outside the inn all those years ago. "I'm glad I stayed," she said softly. "I'm glad I found the courage to begin again." And as their children slept safely inside the house they had built together, as the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, Willow and Xavier Yates held each other close, grateful for second chances, for doors that open when others close, and for the quiet whisper, "Stay here with me," that had changed both their lives forever.